to the Wandering Creatives podcast and the Fun with Friends podcast. This is the crossover event you never knew you needed until today. I am super excited to have Lauren Hooper on today, who is a creative and was living a little bit of a nomadic lifestyle, is living a nomadic lifestyle this summer for sure, and is just full of knowledge about what it's like to travel and bring your crafts with you. So I'm pumped to have you on today to chat a little bit about your adventures.
Oh, thank you. These are my two favorite things to talk about ever. And I don't get to talk about the travel as much. So I'm really pumped.
And Lauren, you've been on the Wandering Creatives podcast before. We were talking about your creative business and what you do and how amazing all of your jewelry is. And you had kind of mentioned in that episode that you did a lot of traveling with your husband, I believe. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And you were able to kind of like still keep your business up and running and have this amazing creative career while you were traveling. And I was like, oh, we have to explore this a little bit more. So I'm pumped to have you on. And so to get started, I want to talk a little bit about where you've been. Where have you traveled to?
Oh, such a good question. So growing up, I didn't really travel much. College was the first time I ever flew anywhere, and I flew to Nashville. And I just knew I always wanted to travel. It was just something like I always knew was in me, and more than just travel. You know, I knew I wanted to live other places. I don't know why. You know, I'm from a really small town, and it was just something I was curious about. I didn't know anyone else who did it, but I just felt like it didn't belong, you know? And then in college, I started traveling some. I started going on some international trips. I went to Nicaragua and Russia and then Paris. So those were 2, 3, I guess, you know, some of them were together. So, you know, I got this feel for international travel. And then the first time I flew was to Nashville, was to work at a summer camp for kids. And we traveled all over the US. And I just loved it. I love traveling and moving around and getting to meet so many new people and go so many new places. And so it just kind of started to become a thing for me. And so I always knew I wanted to travel and live abroad. I didn't really know what that would look like. I have a degree, both of my degrees are in social work, and I knew I wanted to do international disaster relief because I'd read a book about that like as a teenager, and I thought that sounds awesome. I can travel and help people. And then I met my husband and we went to grad school together, and he also wanted to live abroad because he had actually traveled a ton growing up. And so we both just decided like, okay, we don't know what that looks like, but we're going to figure that out together. So we just kept renting our house. We, you know, paid off our cars. We didn't really buy anything. And we just started looking around for ways we could go international. And he found a blog post. He's a music teacher, about a music teacher who was teaching at an international school abroad. And so we started researching that and figured out what we would need to do to qualify to teach internationally. And we did that. So we went to a job fair, and it was like in this big gymnasium, and there were all these booths for international schools from all over the world. Every country was there almost. And you just went and handed them your resume essentially, and they would look at it and hand it right back to you. It'd be like, nope. And so they were looking for really specific things. And so no one was actually looking for a high school music teacher and a school counselor. So finally, a school from Korea told us that they needed a music teacher and that they wanted to start a counseling program eventually. And so they asked if we would come do that for them. So our first place we moved was to South Korea. So we lived there for 3 years. And then so the quick story is then I started my business on the side, and I was working at the school. And so after 3 years, I decided to stop working at the school, go full time into my business. And my husband had finished his doctorate at that point. And so I literally started Googling again, and I found him a job teaching music at a university in the Middle East. So after that, we moved to Sharjah, which is a city outside of Dubai in the desert. And so we lived in the United Arab Emirates for 3 years. And then COVID happened, and we had plans to move elsewhere after that, but all the visas and stuff shut down. Like every country started shutting down and stopped doing visas. And so we had the option to stay in Dubai, but we decided not to. We're really glad that we didn't, because they stayed online for a couple years and we were very isolated out in the desert. And so it would have been a very difficult thing. And so we ended up moving back to America. We moved to Asheville. And so it was really nice in the pandemic to be able to go onto the Blue Ridge Parkway and go like hiking and stuff and be able to get out. So now we're in Raleigh. So that's kind of our story of where, we've been. Yeah. And so we traveled. We've been to like over 40 countries in those 6 years. We went to probably 40 countries in 6 years, and some multiple times. I mean, we traveled like every weekend, and, we hope to go back international one day, hopefully sooner than later. And so, so that's kind of our story of how we got there, where all we lived.
I feel like first off, that's amazing. I'm like insanely jealous and also like super, super impressed that you were just like, this is something we want to do. How can we do it? You like implemented a plan and like made that shit happen, which is amazing. Because I feel like a lot of people I say a lot of people, I'm thinking of myself, but I'm sure others are kind of like me out there. But like we think about it a lot. We're like, oh, I want to travel. I want to live abroad. I want to do this, but we don't actually come up with a plan or like implement anything. So I'm always impressed when people are like, yeah, I wanted to do X, Y, and Z. So I did X, Y, and Z, and I like made it happen. So that's super impressive. And I also feel like 3 years in a location is like the perfect amount of time, because you can like get to know it and like kind of dig in a little bit, and then you can go about your way.
Yeah. And we found that 3 years we would get comfortable, and so we're always like, we could have stayed a little longer, but it really does. It takes 3 years to get comfortable somewhere new. And so it was a good time. So our third year, we felt, much more smooth sailing, but yeah, so it was a good time.
So when you were in Korea, you started your business. What type of business was that?
Yeah, so it kind of just happened. We started, another friend and I on the internet started posting art journal pages on the internet, and people wanted to learn more. And so we ended up starting an art journaling membership program where we taught art journaling techniques and had courses and things like that. And so it eventually just kind of grew. And at the end of the 3 years, our 3 years in Korea, it just made sense because I was essentially working 2 full-time jobs. And, my husband got a really good job in the Middle East. And so we could, financially balance it well. And so I went full-time into that. And so I was teaching art journaling techniques online. And then it grew so much that it quickly became managing people, who were teaching for us and, doing a lot of behind the scenes things. And it ended up not being something that I wanted to do long-term, because it had a very narrow focus. And, I had kind of like worked my way out of doing the art, which is what I wanted to work my way into doing. So I sold my portion of the business, and then I started the art retreat program.
Nice. So when you were traveling a lot, did you have a lot of gear that you would travel with, like as a creative? Because when I think about it, I'm like, something I could easily take with me traveling would be like a journal or a sketchbook or like my knitting stuff. But when you think about like moving abroad for a number of years, I don't know, I feel like I would be tempted to just like pack a suitcase just of hobby stuff. But like, how did you manage that?
So I think that's 2 questions of, moving abroad versus just traveling are so different. I have always had an art studio, whether it be in like the laundry room or I had a full room for it. So when we moved abroad, I had a whole studio, and I would just slowly kind of build it up. I would have to purge a ton of stuff because you could only, take and ship so much stuff. And then I would just kind of build my stash back up from shopping locally or from having stuff shipped over or just bringing home. We would bring home huge suitcases every time we came back full of stuff we couldn't get while we were there. And so it was just kind of like figuring out what I could and couldn't get locally and then bringing the rest back. Or if people came to visit us, I would be like, I'm going to ship you an entire suitcase worth of stuff. Like, please bring it over. So figuring out like creative ways to do that and just ways to be creative with what I could find locally. And so I did have a lot of stuff overseas just in my home. And then I would purge it all when we would move again and, ship as much as I could. Because you also have to think like you can't ship oil paints there because they're like flammable. And so you're not allowed to ship them internationally. So, figuring out stuff like that and also figuring out like the weight of things, like, is it worth to ship a lot of books and paper? And so, and our markers going to last because we would ship everything by sea. So they would get loaded onto shipping containers and sometimes they would be on the ship for 6-8 weeks. And so I would have to think like, are my markers going to survive? So I would either have to take them with me or just sell them and replace them when I moved, so just little things like that. It's just all, trial and error, figuring it out. And then when it comes to traveling, we are super light travelers. Like I'm talking like a backpack, like you carry to school. That's all we'll take that's all I took for a month in Utah. And I had the dog. So I had my stuff and the dog stuff for a month I just did. Now, I mean, of course I bought stuff when I got there. Like, I went to Target and got, some hair stuff that I couldn't fly with anyway. But for the most part, we are super minimal. And within that, I was also a work trip. So I had my computer, I had an art kit, I had my clothes, I had the dog's food. I had, everything we both needed in just a regular size backpack.
Wow. That's so impressive. Like that blows my mind. I'm like the opposite.
Well, you quickly learn as the more you travel, the more stuff you take, the more stuff you take. You have to carry it around all the time with you. You have to spend all your time managing it. You have to pay for it, to get on the plane. You have to, especially if you're like backpacking a lot, I have taken like roll suitcases and we went to Cambodia and they literally took us on a small boat to an island and they couldn't get to the island and they like put us out in the ocean. And so we had to like carry our bags over our heads, and so I was like, well, this is a learning experience. Like you can only take what you can carry over your head, and so I quickly learned that lesson and it makes traveling so much easier when I have nothing.
I love that. Like I'm slowly working towards being like a minimal packer, but it has been a challenge. And luckily I have friends where I can like bring them over and be like, okay, this is where I'm going. This is how long I'm going. This is what I have packed. And they're like, no, just start throwing stuff out of the suitcase. And I'm like, okay, great. Thank you. Well, I need someone to edit me.
Yes, it's all about the editing. And you realize that it's so much easier when you have less choices to make too. Like this is the outfit I brought, so I'm obviously wearing it. And you can get anything you need anywhere in the world. Truly, you can. I have never been somewhere and couldn't get something I needed.
Yeah, I have to remind myself of that because I even traveling just within the US, I forget that sometimes. I'm like, if I forget something, I can pick it up somewhere else. It's totally fine. So
exactly.
Yeah, getting in that mindset is definitely a goal. It is a goal to aim for.
But now when I road trip, I drive my husband crazy because I will load the car up with everything possible because it's like my one chance to take all my fun stuff, even though I know I'm never going to touch it on the road, like we're going to be too busy doing stuff, but I will pack the car completely full on a road trip. So, I'm not perfect in every travel scenario.
And you guys are doing a road trip this summer, right? Or like soon?
Yes. In less than 2 weeks, we are leaving for 6 weeks for the Pacific Northwest we have a 16-foot Scamp camper.
Very cool. Oh my gosh. That is going to be amazing. It's such an amazing experience. And something I'm curious about is how does like the traveling and that kind of experience impact your art and your creativity?
So much. And I always say this, that when we moved to Korea, my creativity exploded. And that is when I realized that travel is really one of the biggest influencers for me in creativity. Just, the fact that think about when you travel, you're like always outside. You're always exploring new things. You're always trying new foods. You're not just sitting at home watching TV all day, which is what I do most of the days of my life, and so I'm just experiencing so many new things. And, you just find murals on the wall and you find art galleries and, you notice that the houses are all painted such cool colors, and you see new plants that are interesting. So it just like spirals, on itself. Everywhere you go, there's just so much more to see. And there's so much, new ideas and things that come just from being out of the norm. And that's something I really try and encourage people to do is like, if you're stuck in a rut, like you don't have to go on an international trip. Like Google festivals in your town and go to a weird festival that doesn't sound interesting to you or doesn't sound like something you would normally do, and go do that, because it gives you that same feeling of being somewhere new and being exposed to new things, because those new experiences, I'm a very novel person. I like the novelty of new stuff. And a lot of us are. And that's kind of what spikes our creativity, is seeing something different.
Yeah, I love that. And kind of shaking up everything and getting a new perspective on a place or an activity and using that in your art. And I think people can definitely see that. Like you do like amazing, like polymer clay, like earrings and things. And some of them are based off of like the places that you've been. And yeah, it's just fantastic. You can definitely see it in your artwork. This is one of my favorite questions to ask, but people find it sometimes to be like trying to pick your favorite child. But like, what's your Jesus? Sorry.
Okay.
How do I want to word this? What has been your favorite place that you've traveled to, or a favorite place?
I always say like I have different like travel experiences, so Palm Springs in California is one of my favorite places I've ever been in the US, kind of as like a city, kind of relaxy, but creative, art inspired vacation. Vietnam is one of my favorite places in the East, and Iceland. I mean, is anything ever cooler than Iceland? So, so those are all like such different experiences.
Yeah. Oh, Iceland is definitely on my bucket list. And I've heard amazing things about Vietnam. So that does not surprise me at all that it's a place that you've enjoyed. What's one of the craziest things that you've ever done while traveling? Like, do you try to find like, bungee jumping or surfing, or do you do those types of activities when you travel?
We're very cheap people, so we are not into those like huge, expensive kind of thrill things. But I mean, we have done some of them. Like in the UAE is the longest zip line in the world. And my husband did it with his family when they came. I had to work and it was fine. I didn't care. So, I mean, we definitely have experiences like that. But I would say one of the craziest things that we've ever done, or I've ever done, I went to Taiwan with a girlfriend for a long weekend when we lived in Korea. And so we did a Hunger Games food tour. And so they wouldn't tell us what anything was. So there was just a group of us, we like signed up for the food tour online, and we showed up and they took us to all these different street food vendors, and they just ordered food in Taiwanese, and then they handed it to us and we had to eat it. And then they would tell us what it was. And so we ate crazy things. And honestly, pretty much all of it was good. Like we ate a pig's blood popsicle, and it was like covered in like in peanuts. So it just kind of tasted like peanut butter. So we ate horrible, crazy things that you would never think, but they were all pretty good.
What a cool experience. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that was not what I was expecting when you said like a Hunger Games style, like food tour. I had something else in mind, but what a cool experience. I don't know if I would be brave enough to do that.
It was, my friend was very adventurous who I was with. And, it was just a group of strangers. And this is, pre-COVID days, we all shared one popsicle, like 12 strangers, and so it's one of those things that like, you do stuff overseas that you would never, ever do anywhere else. But you're like, why not? Like, clearly everyone's here eating at this food stall. So nothing that bad can happen.
Yeah. Oh my God. I love that. That sounds like that's a really, I don't know if I've had anyone share an experience like that before, like a food related experience. So that's really interesting.
Oh, I'm all about the food. Literally, whenever people travel, they're like, can you give me some restaurants to go to? And I'm like, yes. And I'll be like, here's how to identify a good restaurant when you go to this like country. I am very into the food.
Oh, I mean, yeah, how could you not be? That's part of like the whole travel experience is getting to enjoy the food. What's a bucket list location? So somewhere that you've wanted to go that you haven't gone yet.
Oh, this is easy. I had a big trip to Morocco planned with my girlfriends, and the day of my flight, Morocco shut down for good for COVID. So thankfully I didn't get on my flight because I would have been there very alone to Morocco. I mean, Morocco just has everything. It's so beautiful. The landscape's beautiful. It's got, all of the bazaars and shopping and experiences and history and good food. So it is one of my saddest trips that I missed out on that I one day will get back to.
Yeah, hopefully you can reschedule that one. I had to cancel a trip to Morocco as well, and it was like heartbreaking. I was really looking forward to it, but one day we'll get there.
One day.
What tips or advice do you have for artists or just creatives in general that are looking to maybe be a little more nomadic or even looking to move abroad for a period of time?
Yeah. And, and my most boring answer is that it really comes down to kind of what your craft is and having consistency. We were both, in the school system. And so we had that really great schedule so that we could travel on lots of long weekends and over the holidays. And we had long summer breaks and winter breaks. And so we could do big trips then. But really, those were kind of like inspiration gathering trips. And then I would come home and make at home, because I can travel with some of my crafts, a lot more when I used to art journal. But now that I weave and I do clay, like I won't be able to take any clay with me this summer because our camper doesn't have an oven. And I don't have a toaster oven and I'm not taking a toaster oven to bake. And it's just so many tools and like sitting still. So, I'm thinking about like, what can I do that's mobile, that's easy, that's on the road, that can be kind of inspired by what we're doing. And so I'm going to take a small loom and some yarn. And of course there are stores everywhere I can buy more yarn. And I'm going to my plan is to create a series of weavings based on everywhere we go. So kind of like a US weaving series by the end of it is my goal. And I am going to take some cyanotype paper, where you do the sun printing. And so everywhere we go, I'm going to pick some like wildflowers or like leaves that are unique to the location and do the printing on there so that I'll have an art project that I can hang up. So it's just kind of thinking about like what you're doing, and a lot of trips, I don't take art stuff at all because I'm going for the weekend and I'm going to be with my girlfriends the whole time. And we're just like going to go and like see as much as we can. And then I'd rely really heavily on my photos and I bring those back with me. I take tons of up close photos of colors, textures, lines, art I see, and I'll like jot down notes of like, make some earrings in this color scheme or something. And so I try to, like I said, think about what I'm doing, be realistic about it, have goals, and then I can come home and continue to work from there.
I absolutely love the idea of doing like a small loom for every place that you've been and doing like a little weaving project. That's such a cool idea. And then also the paper, what is it? Sandpaper, is that right? With like, such a good idea. That's going to be, I can't wait to see everything when you come back and like see how the location kind of inspired what you were working on. So that's going to be really cool to see.
Yeah. And we'll see if I do anything at all. I mean, that's always the thing. Like I have some friends who travel. I mean, Katie, our mutual friend, she creates so much while she travels, but Katie is also very introverted and I'm extremely extroverted. And I travel with my husband who also is extroverted and not really, but he wants to go and do things, he wants to go do things with me. That's it. But, like we just don't stop. We don't sit still very long at all. And like we take the dog everywhere we go. So he's always wanting to be on the move. And so, it just depends on your personal style, how much you do while you travel.
Definitely. I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm kind of lazy when I travel, but then I'm also like, I should go and do things. So then I try to go do things. So I'm somewhere in the middle, but I like the idea of being able to take like small projects with you or small things, maybe like taking Polaroids or something that you can turn into some type of project or use as inspiration for later projects. I think stuff like that's like a really good idea. So for folks that are listening on the Wandering Creatives podcast, when I have people on the Fun with Friends podcast, one of the last questions I ask is, what is a bucket list item? So something you've always wanted to do, and it can literally be anything that you've always wanted to do that you haven't done yet, and why do you think you haven't done it?
Okay, I need to think about this one for a minute. Oh,
at
all
all?
right. I
Okay.
know. One thing that I've always wanted to do that I haven't done is see the Northern Lights. And I know why I haven't done it. I am terrified of the cold. We have always traveled warm places during the cold. And so one day we're going to work up the gumption and take a really good trip somewhere cold and see the Northern Lights.
Ooh, that's a good one. You could go
Yeah.
to Iceland,
I
right?
know, I know. So they have really great flights from RDU now. And so we're talking because we've already been to Iceland like in the summer and done like the whole road trip thing. And I mean, of course, we'd go back and do everything again and more. But we were like, we could just go for a long weekend, see the Northern Lights, like camp in those cool, like those like clear igloos, like out,
Yeah.
and then just come home because that would be really expensive too to stay in those. And so I was like, 2 days, we can afford that. And that'd be the whole trip. So
It's
it's a
totally
possibility.
doable. I'm actually flying out on, what is it, Iceland Air or Icelandic Air or whatever when I go to Ireland. So I have a layover in Iceland. So I'll be stepping foot in Iceland for a few hours.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, let me know if you need some restaurant recommendations if you can't do a ton. Yeah.
Yeah, I think my layovers are like fairly short, but someone told me that you can actually, part of like what Iceland does is if you are flying, if they're like a layover, you can add like 2 days on, or they'll let you like for free or something. And I'm like,
I think
I'm
so.
sorry.
I've heard that. Yeah.
Let me look into, so I got to look into that a little bit more because I'm like, ooh, if I could stay there like on my way back from Ireland for an extra like 2 days, like why not?
Yeah.
So I got to look into that a little bit, but yeah, Iceland is majestic.
It is. And 2 days is probably all you can afford. It is just as expensive as everyone says it is. And I'm sure now it is crazy.
Yeah, that's what someone else said. They were like, it is insanely expensive there. And I was like, okay, so maybe I can find a hostel somewhere.
Yeah, and everything's nice. I mean, and that's the thing. Like we've stayed in some really, questionable places, but anywhere you're going to stay in Iceland's going to be nice no matter where it is.
The dream.
Yeah.
We're going to make it happen. We're going to make it happen. Iceland is where it's at. Lauren, I can't thank you enough for being on the podcast. But before we sign off, is there anything that you're working on? I know you have travel coming up, so you might not be putting new stuff out or anything like that, or going to any markets. But is there anything you'd like to share with the listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I think your people would really love. So I created these travel journals based off my own travels, my creative exploration. And so I have 2 journals. One is a travel journal for artists. And so you take it with you on a trip, and it's got about 100 pages in it. And it's got guided questions that help you plan your trip. Like it's got a packing list, all that kind of stuff. And then it has daily notes for you to take notes of what you're doing each day. Then it has like a scrapbook section. So you can put pictures and like ephemera stuff, like tickets and stuff you pick up. And then it has an art section. And so it's got some prompts and some blank pages, and it's got some nice thick paper so that you can paint and draw on it. And so it'll be like, make a map of everywhere you went, or, draw what you see right now where you're sitting. So it's a nice like guided journal to help you document your trip. And then I have these really tiny journals. They're like pocket journals, and they're also guided, and they help you collect inspiration as you travel. Just anywhere. It can be just as your daily travel, or, if you go on a trip, you can take it. And so it'll be like, there'll be a prompt that's like, put a color scheme down that you saw that you liked, or, draw some lines that were interesting to you that you saw today. And so you can kind of use it to take your ideas, and then you can put them all together and turn them into a piece of art. And so it's a great thing to just, have if you're a creative person who likes to be out and about and gather ideas without like sitting and sketching the whole thing. You can just quickly like draw some lines, and it'll be, kind of just a trigger for later for when you want to actually sit down and create. And so I have those journals in my Etsy shop right now. I don't have a ton left because I think I'm going to be done with them. I love them, but they are just, products sitting, and they have to do like big orders when I order them all. And so, people, if you have a creative business, you understand like the product stock conundrum. Yes. But I still have a good many left, especially of the inspiration journals, because they're so small. And so if you use the code creative22, you can get 22% off either of the journals or of the journal bundle if you are a creative person and you want a little journal to help you capture your ideas.
Awesome. Those sound amazing. I'm probably going to pick up both of them.
They're very fun and they're actually on sale right now.
What? Okay. Nice. Yeah. Those sound like the perfect journal for creatives. So I am on board with them 100%. Oh, so cool. Yeah. So Lauren, what's your Etsy?
Oh, yep. They're in my Etsy shop. It is Lauren Likes Art is my Etsy shop.
And then where else can folks find you and join your travels?
Yep. So I post on Instagram every day. I'm Lauren Likes Blog. I have a newsletter that I send every week with creative challenges. I have a podcast that also comes out every week called How She Creates, where we talk about creative things. And I share kind of little updates about what I'm doing. So you can find all of that. My website is lauren-likes.com, or in the show notes, find me on Instagram, and everything is linked there.
Yes, and I will include all of Lauren's information in the show notes, so you will be able to find everything super easy. You can just click on it and it will take you to where you need to go. So definitely check that out. Definitely, I personally enjoy your Instagram a ton. I follow along with everything because it's what you do is so inspiring, like your work, your aesthetic. Oh, I love it.
Oh, I appreciate it so much.
Oh, it's so good. And like I said, I'm really looking forward to kind of traveling along with you this summer, especially in your little scamper. It's going to be super fun.
So close. I'm so ready.
2 weeks. It'll pass in no time. It'll be there. And with that, Lauren, again, I can't thank you enough for being on. I really appreciate it. And you're on your way to being the most valuable, the MVG, the most valuable guest. It's reserved for folks that have been on the podcast more than once. So I guess you technically are an MVG right now. So congratulations.
Thank you. It's an honor.
And with that, stay creative and get out there, try something new, and have some fun. Goodbye. Thanks for listening to the Fun with Friends podcast, a CEI media production. Please like, rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast as it helps us greatly. You can follow us on Instagram at Fun with Friends Podcast and on Facebook. If you would like to support the podcast, you can become a Patreon for just $5 a month. The link is in the episode description. Now get out there, try something new, and have some fun. Bye.